Right, good evening everyone. I think it's about time we make a start, 7:15. My name is John Denny and I'm sharing tonight. And since they're not just at the table ready, we can introduce ourselves, starting from
Chris Witherington, Community Engagement Manager of Merton Council.
John Denny, as I said, local council.
I'm Councillor Alambritis.
And I'm Katie Holter. I'm the Climate Officer in Merton Council, so I'll be doing that climate bit.
We'll go around to the next.
I can start. My name is Paris Bonzoglu. I'm a local resident.
I'm Richard, and I've been a resident just up the road here for about 37 years now.
Yes, a long time.
It is a long time, yes.
Hi, I'm Jasmine. I work for Oasis Church just up the road.
Yeah.
Luke Taylor, local resident in Craven.
Rudy, resident.
Yes, sir.
Mark Gale, resident of Malden and also part of Merton.TV, which records these meetings, so all these seats that are empty can be watched out from home.
I'm
I'm Solomon, John's neighbour,
neighbour. And this lady is taking out photograph, so we'll go to the side. Right, now we're going to welcome. Our first item on the agenda is climate emergency. It's just a topical of Brexit, but we'll leave Brexit alone tonight with the climate emergency. And Katie Hunter is going to introduce it to us.
Thank you. Hello. Where should I stand up? That's it. Hi everyone, I'm the Climate Officer of the Merton Council. I'm here to tell you about the climate emergency that was declared by the Council in July and a little bit about why the Council declared it an emergency and if you wish to get involved, how you might want to get involved. So if you look at the evidence that we've got available at the moment, Merton produces about 500,000 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions a year. That is mostly due to the energy that's used in buildings. So if you switch your boiler on for your heating, that makes up about half of the greenhouse gas emissions that I've been talking about. Electricity makes up about a quarter, and petrol and diesel that's in cars makes up another quarter. So, and if you count some of the other emissions that Merton might produce, so if residents take flights outside of the borough, for example, or if you think about the products that people buy and the carbon footprint associated with those, you can push that 500,000 up to even 1 million or more a year. We don't have good estimates of those, but we're pretty certain that it's going to be at least 1 million tonnes a year. So it's on this sort of evidence that the council decided to declare a climate emergency. That was a declaration that the council made in July. It was a unanimous decision to declare a climate emergency. So all parties, Tory, Lib Dem, Conservative, Labour, they all voted in favour of declaring the climate emergency. And that emergency declaration did 3 things. So the first thing it did was set aspirational targets to decarbonise Merton. So it's the aspirational target to decarbonise Merton is 2050. And then the council decided as well that that it could potentially decarbonise its buildings and services more quickly than that. So it set itself a target of 2030. The second thing it did was commit to delivering an action plan which is consistent with meeting those targets. So we're currently working, sort of drawing together a work plan to deliver that action plan. We've got a working group made up of residents and businesses in the borough who are steering that action plan, and we've also got an internal work programme going. If you think about that action plan, then what you're basically talking about is roughly a 12% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that have to happen every year in the borough to 2050. So if you think about what the implications of that is for residents and businesses and the council itself and its own services, we're talking about a pace and a scale of change that's quite big. So, for example, so 3/4 of the borough's sort of energy emissions are due to the gas and electricity that's used in buildings. So if you were to decarbonise those buildings, you'd have to do it at a rate of about 3,000 homes per year, every year to 2050. And if we were to decarbonise transport, that's the equivalent of taking about 2,500 cars registered to Merton off the road every year, or replacing them with sort of greener alternatives like electric vehicles. It also would involve changing some of the choices that people make day to day about what they buy and how they get to work, and could potentially involve increasing in the number of trees which store carbon in their trunks, and also things like ensuring that when you invest money, you do that responsibly. I was going to say a little bit about how you can get involved if you want to. So I guess the first thing to think about is the individual choices that everybody makes. So that really does genuinely make the biggest difference to climate. So if you understand what greenhouse gas emissions you might cause by driving your car to work, for example, you can potentially change that. And if you want advice about how to do that, so the really big ones are usually the energy that people use, the cars, flights, meat consumption has a very high greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. So things like buying less meat, buying locally, and buying things that aren't packaged also is very helpful. If you want more advice about that, there's a website. Sustainable Merton is our local charity which does sustainability projects, and they have a good kind of checklist on their website that you can go to and have a look. The second thing you could potentially do is think about how you could work as a group or a community to do low carbon projects. So, for example, you could do a community energy project or a planting project or something like that. If you want to do that sort of thing, you're more than welcome to get in contact with me, and because first of all, I'd love to hear about it, and secondly, we might be able to be of assistance. The third thing is to contribute to the action plan that I mentioned at the beginning. So we're looking to put out a sort of consultation survey in a few weeks' time. We're just finalising this at the moment. So that asks some questions, and it also invites you to give ideas about what you want to see in that action plan. And if you've got anything really detailed you want to talk about in relation to the action plan, you can either just send me an email or ring me up. And I'd be very happy to talk to you about it. And I guess the last thing is really that there's been a lot of government protesting in relation to climate change, and so there's been a lot of publicity around it. That publicity actually is quite useful for the council because there are gaps in the powers we as a council have to do things. So the council only controls a small amount of the emissions directly, and everything else we would rely on people's choices and national governments to sort of work in the same direction in order to be successful. That's pretty much all I was going to say. I've got one more sort of thing to tell you. But do you have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make?
What's the actual definition of decarbonise? My question was, what is the actual definition of decarbonise? What is meant by that?
So if you think about all the emissions that are generated as a result of the borough's activities, the main way that you would decarbonise is to try and...
What is decarbonise? What is decarbonise? Not how we're going to do it, what is it? That's my next question.
So the greenhouse...
Being carbon neutral, what does decarbonise mean?
Yes, it means carbon neutral. The greenhouse gas emissions, so carbon dioxide is the most common one. So greenhouse gas emissions that go into the atmosphere, if you essentially stop those from going into the atmosphere, that is decarbonisation. So you can do that by using electricity, because that generates carbon dioxide when you make the electricity. It means that when you burn your gas, the carbon dioxide goes into the air. So it's literally preventing those things from happening. There are ways you can take the carbon from the air and capture it, if you like. So growing a tree is an example of that, where the tree takes the carbon dioxide and puts it in its trunk. So if that stays there for 100 years, you've successfully sequestered that carbon. So if there are emissions that are either massively expensive to stop, or it's technically not possible to stop, then you could potentially do something like growing more trees to offset those emissions that you can't avoid. Is that
yes, thank you. And by using electric vehicles, the carbon dioxide is being generated somewhere else, just not in Merton, assuming that it's not nuclear energy or everything.
Yeah, so electric vehicles aren't zero carbon, but the evidence suggests that they're massively better than petrol and diesel cars, and that's the case for two reasons. So the first reason is because they're much more efficient than petrol and diesel cars. So you save about a third of greenhouse gas emissions just by switching to a more efficient engine. And then the emissions associated with the electricity grid are much lower than most other fossil fuels. So, sorry, I said that wrong. They're the average grid intensity, the carbon intensity of the grid, is much lower than burning petrol or diesel. Did that make sense?
So reducing the electricity from gas or whatever produces less carbon dioxide than actually running vehicles off petrol or diesel?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And that is likely to go lower over time, because when you decarbon, the electricity grid is the biggest success story when it comes to decarbonisation. So it's gone from about 1% renewables in about 2009 to 25% renewables today, and that programme is continuing. So it's a good news story.
It was really helpful intro to what the council's doing. One of the things you mentioned was residents giving you examples of what we are doing, or one of the things I think would be really helpful is giving residents kind of case studies of good ideas or good programmes that other councils or other groups of residents have done, whether it's in Merton, whether it's outside, whether it's just somewhere in the country or even internationally, to say, like, here's something you could do, like all drawn up to an electric car club, which are kind of jumping up around the place, or kind of showing them that there are options to do that, or planting trees. There's these grants available to plant trees on your in your gardens or in the kind of communal spaces, or kind of joining up and getting solar panels on like 5 houses in a row and that sort of stuff. So yes, we can kind of come to you, but a lot of the time we don't know what is a good thing to do or what is an option. So having 2 or 3 good examples of things that you and your neighbours could do would be really helpful, I think.
And how would you like to hear about that?
Well, our Merton magazine comes out and the emails that we sometimes get, councillors can do that, but it's a good way to just kind of help us, help ourselves, because often we don't have that expertise, we don't have that knowledge, and obviously as a dedicated council department that understands it better than we do, that would be really good. And obviously working with other community organisations, Friends of the Earth and that sort of stuff, I'm sure that you can come up with good little things that we can do specifically.
So,
That'd be very helpful.
we have a community plan and development, and one of the things that we're going to do as part of that is to do spotlights on these sorts of fantastic community work that happens. So hopefully you should be able to see that come through over the coming months.
You know the electric scooters that have come round now, which we're being told they're illegal on the road and they're illegal on the pavement. What about cycle lanes? Because we have a great one that goes all down the high road. So would they be legal on a cycle lane?
So I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding is that you're right, they're not legal on the pavements or the roads. Unfortunately, that's the national government legislation, so that would need to change in order for that to...
So the council wouldn't have the power to say, within Merton, you can use them on the cycle lanes?
I'm sorry, I'm afraid we don't.
And the bit here is still highway code wise treated as a road, because it's not segregated.
And they look so fun.
I must say I spent a few days in Hockenheim last week, and electric scooters are everywhere. I think they're government, allows people to use it. And there was a little cycle lane on the pavement, people are riding away. Hockenheim, Germany, where they have the concrete motor. Everybody's riding this electric scooter. But, we will eventually, a license people to ride scooters here, but we're always a bit late in catching up with these things, but it will happen.
And one of the things we've committed to do as part of the climate emergency declaration is identify what those gaps are. So there might be gaps in legislation or funding, which means that it will be very difficult to meet our 2050 target. And we've committed to raise those with national government. Sorry, this gentleman was first.
I'm going back a few months now, but last time I passed the Civic Centre, all the lights were on at night. Does the Civic Centre have timers, movement, activated lights and LEDs?
So,
CCTV cameras. Banks of CCTV, the NHS is there. We rent 3 of the floors, so there's plenty of staff working through the night.
But does the council have?
We have, our lights are motion sensors and also, they only come on when it gets dark and stuff like that.
Okay.
So if you're working there at night, every so often you have to sort of get up and run around the corridor.
And that's in all the council offices, is it?
Some of the individual meeting rooms have got normal switch lights, but we work in open plans.
Yeah.
So all the open plan ones, those are motion sensors.
Okay. So you're I guess you're leading by example.
That's a useful question.
Well, we've got a more ambitious target than the whole borough one, and the council's target is to be emission free by 2030. So we've got less time to move on.
So we are looking at those sorts of things. So we're certainly not perfect at the moment, but that's one of the many things that we're starting to look at and see what we can do about it. So.
Is that including all the free parking passes that council staff get and encourage them to drive to work?
Yes, that is. So we are doing a staff travel plan, which is looking at that at the moment. We are hoping to combine that with encouraging the uptake of more electric vehicles for the service vehicles that we own and operate. You know, and then moving up from there.
Is that something you'd require in the Veolia contract? That's that they operate electric garbage trucks or something.
So we're looking at it.
Brand new trucks.
We're looking at it, but well, exactly. So we need to balance the.
Well, there's a programme that they were taking 8-year-old waste trucks off the road, and instead of then replacing with new petrol trucks, they're converting into electric power. So there are definitely economies in smart provision of municipal vehicles. So that it's definitely something that can do. It's not something that should be kind of ignored out of.
No, we're not ignoring it at all.
Yeah.
So we've started to look into it. We need to balance how and when we do it, because especially the sort of larger vehicles, when the electric vehicles that operate at the moment are literally just coming onto the market, and so the price difference between a standard vehicle and an electric vehicle, and also some of the operations and the guarantees associated with them are much more risky than what we've got at the moment. So
You
we're
need
not
to
saying
build into the business case things like reduction in emissions at street level as well, so kind of clean air, not just through carbon emissions, but also nitrous oxides around kind of packets, for example.
Yeah, so the action plan that I mentioned only deals with climate change mitigation, so that's only carbon dioxide. But the council does have a clean air strategy and action plan, which is already in action.
Yeah.
And
those plans got to talk to each other and kind of drive decisions.
Well, we haven't done our climate action plan yet, but it's my firm intention to recognise where the synergies are. So if you take a car off the road, you're both helping climate and reducing your air quality emissions. So we're fully supportive of the way that the council is trying to get more active travel, less idling. There's a whole bunch of actions they're doing on air quality.
I understood the Veolia fleet, because originally we were told when the Veolia contract was starting that it was going to be Veolia, but a few months later, Councillor Alambritis said they were going to be owned by the council, and I'm still confused. They're owned by the council, so it's the council's decision to change them to electric, nothing to do with Veolia.
We will over time.
I don't know if the gentleman had.
Yeah, I'm going to tell us a little bit about mobile telephone transmission masts. Because I must admit that until literally a few weeks ago, I'd never paid any attention to media publicity about these things. Until, as I say, a few weeks ago, when one of them sprang up in Colliers recreation ground. And it's actually, you know, it's visible from my bedroom window. Which means, I guess, that if I can see it from my window, then anything coming out of it radiation-wise is sort of beaming at me in my flat, which is a second-floor flat. And as I say, I know there have been stories about radiation from these things in the media recently, but it's gone in one ear and out the other, basically, because it didn't affect me. Now suddenly it does. Are they really... problem? I mean, should I be worried?
They're not. They're worried.
I'm certain I don't hold any expertise on these sorts of things, so I'm afraid I can't answer.
Can I add something to that, to your client? Whether or not there's a degree of danger about them or not, my question really is, why would the council allow them to put the area, the green boxes, right in the middle of the park, in what has got a green flag park? They plonk them right next to the school, Willow School, and I know they got paid £16,000, and I know the council have to find money. but why on earth would they put them there and actually not conceal them? That would be my question. My understanding is that there are masts all over the place. There is a lack of research apparently in very young, for how they affect very young children. And I don't know about that's the only thing I've ever heard. And obviously, so why would it be right next to the school if there's an aerosol? But there are masts everywhere. But why would we put them where we did? And they do make a noise as well.
Which also,
I don't know if you know the answer. You probably don't know it, Stephen, but it just
No,
is.
no. It's a national. There are national guidelines.
Oh yeah.
These are given permission by the national government by virtue of asking the local authority to look at it. The local authority's ability to object is very, very limited. So
But
you need to take it up with the national government about where they go. Now, we have to balance people wanting to have communication and these masts, which are ugly, I appreciate that, but it is not, it's what's called permitted development rights. You need to take it up with a former minister called Eric Pickles. It's not just masts, it's residents fighting each other over permitted development rights, blocks of flats in the back of their gardens. That is the Conservative government going back to 2010, opening up permitted development rights, which takes away the authority of local authorities to insist or say where things go. So you need to take it up with the national government.
We've just
We are very restricted in whether to stop something going where it goes.
I know.
Once that authority, whether it's G5 or whatever they're called, says we want it there, they're entitled to apply wherever, then we are constrained as to whether we can refuse.
But Merton Council decided where it went. I've got a response from that to me
The
on that.
provider decides where it wants to go. The Planning Applications Committee, which is cross-party, apolitical and not wit, has the final decision under severe constraints from advice from officers.
All I'm asking was, if it went 5 metres back and there were some hedges put in front of them, nobody, that's all I'm saying. I'm not, everybody uses a phone. There are more phones in this country than there are people. We all know that. Well, maybe we don't. But it's just right in the middle of, right by the parkway, right by a bench. If it was if someone had a little bit of thought about it, they could have put in.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know why it's exactly where it is.
Yeah, it just seems really sad. Our one green part that we've got coming away.
I've got 2 quick questions. One is about contracts. So if the council's serious, is it incorporating into its contracts green provisions where they will only consider contracts that are carbon neutral, etc., etc.? That's question 1. And the second one relates to home working. So if you've got, hundreds or thousands of staff, is there a commitment or is there, some kind of drive to say, hey, work from home 4 days a week, 5 days a week, but some level of commitment to having people that don't work, they'll use their own electricity, they won't use the vehicles, etc., etc. So there's going to be an automatic statement there. You can rent another floor of the Civic Centre out and get some money.
So we welcome
so 2
ideas
questions.
like that. So I'll take your last question first. We welcome ideas like that as part of the action plan process, so I'll take a note of that.
Flexi working from home is hugely encouraged within the plan.
Yeah, so
and the council.
In the council.
So is it?
So that's why when I suddenly discovered that all my personal details were on the planning portal in an architect's document for the High Path development on a Friday, and I emailed 3 senior council officers, I got out of office replies from all of them.
I don't know.
We are allowed to delay well, sometimes.
So I guess my ask then is, can the council consider not just encouraging but making it part of a specification of a role? You will work from home 3 days a week, 5 days a week. I'm sure you'll attract better talent because that's attractive to individuals today. You might need to get rid of some of the archaic management that consider productivity akin to a bum on a seat, but the modern world is going flexible, and it could be a competitive differentiator amongst other local authorities.
I mean, I'm fairly new to the local authority, but I've been doing flexible working for nearly 15 years now, work from home 2 days a week, and so I understand the point that you're making. So I'll have a think about that. And on the contracts, yes, we are taking that seriously. So we have, we're currently procuring some technical support to help us get a better estimate of the greenhouse gas emissions, both from the council and from the wider borough, and that will include the main procured services. So we'll include that in that. And so the actions that come out of that work may well result in us, for example, tightening procurement policies and thinking about whether climate or other sustainability considerations should be taken into consideration. There's always a balance, because these sorts of additional requirements quite often result in high costs. So there's always a consideration on using people who pay their council tax wisely, but it's...
Yeah, I'm sure there's a trade-off somewhere, right? I'm sure some contractors may say, oh look, this means that we've got to buy a new fleet, but then they'll drop off the list of eligible vendors, right? I'm sure there's a sweet spot somewhere where you can use that as a percentage of the decision at tender appraisal.
Yeah, so there are some requirements, and there are some criteria that are linked to social and sustainability sort of attributes of the company, but we will look at that again when.
It doesn't, without labouring the point, it doesn't have to be, we want the next Veolia soon to have a fleet full of electric vehicles, but you could say, X percentage should be electric, and if a contractor doesn't even have 1 out of 10 vehicles, then that kind of shows you their commitment to sustainability and climate change.
Yeah. So far, we've contacted, well, I have contacted the 3 largest procured services, so ID30, FM Conway and Veolia, and started to get a sense of their greenhouse gas profile. So, and that will step up a notch once we get our technical support, and then we're looking to actively work with them to try and reduce their impact in Merton through whatever means we can. So it might be that we change procurement policy, for example, but that would only enact once we renew the contract. But we are taking it seriously.
I think it's just interesting that, I absolutely agree with you that we should be doing all this stuff, but the problem is it costs more at the moment, and therefore we're going to be paying more. And unfortunately, some people don't seem to like the idea of that, or continually trying to justify where all the money put on our council tax is spent anyway, whereas the reality is it's hardly gone up at all in many years.
Yeah, so our intention is to make sure, if it does cost more, that we're aware of what the cost difference is, so that a decision can be made in the round. Can I do my final plug? So the Mayor of London has a scheme called Solar Together. The scheme is about buying solar panels. So if you're interested in buying solar panels, please Google Solar Together and Merton. And what that allows you to do is register on their scheme. They will ask you some questions and about your potential for solar panels on your roof. And they will, on the 22nd of October, they will appoint a supplier that could offer you a good quality good priced, well-priced solar panel. If you choose to, if you register, it's you've got no obligation to buy. So once you know the price, you can decide at that point whether to proceed or not. If you want to proceed, they will come and do a proper survey and give you a final quote, and then you make the decision. So, so if you're interested, please Google Solar Together and Merton, and before the 21st of October, because that's when registration ends.
Is there going to be another round after that? Because we've done it a couple of times.
So this is the third round. The GLA have to bid for the funding every year, so we can't be certain. But what we do know is there's a bit of a snowball effect that happens. So each year they're getting more and more people that are taking up the scheme and hearing about it. So it's a big decision to buy solar panels. So people who heard about it last time might actually do it in the next round. So it's the GLA's intention to continue, but each year there's a funding decision.
Is there any information about how much carbon is generated by actually making the solar panels and installing the solar panels and everything?
So I don't have that information off the top of my head, but generally, what you generally find with products that like that is that the energy, the greenhouse gas emissions used to make the product is way smaller. So the benefit that you get from avoiding the energy is way, I'm going to get the wrong way around, is way better than the emissions used to make the
the benefits far outweighs.
So I did see a study, I did see a study ages ago that said that small wind turbines, you pay off your greenhouse gas emissions that you used to make it in 2 months. So it's a big difference because energy is so carbon intensive.
I've had solar panels for about 9 years now, and I've not only paid for them, I've paid for double glazing in the back of my house with the money that I get from the feed-in tariff. I don't think that's used anymore, is it? But it apparently isn't still. It's far more efficient. I get more money for my solar panels than I do pay gas and electricity. So I'm effectively neutral.
But you're saying that
I don't think that, and the bit I don't know is what because without the feed-in tariff it's slightly different, and I don't know, are they thinking about funding for battery packs as well with them? Because otherwise the money, you get very little money going back in.
So there's lots of answers. So the feed-in tariff is closed for new applications, but the scheme is being replaced by another scheme which I can never remember the first name, Smart Export Guarantee. And what that means is that when you produce electricity that you sell back to the grid, the energy company has to pay a good fair price for it. So which didn't happen in the past. And the other major thing that's happened is that the price of solar panels has massively reduced. So they've reduced by about 90%. So even though the feed-in tariff isn't there anymore, on a kind of average semi, so this won't work for everybody, but with an average semi with a south-facing roof, you get the same sort of rate of return than you did 10 years ago, even though the market's changed quite a lot. So some things have improved, some things have got worse, but it kind of balances out on an average semi with a south-facing roof. So you get roughly a 10-year payback period for the investment you make.
Any more questions or comments? If not, say thanks to Katie. Right, so our next item is the council update by Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me to this committee forum. So this is the second of these that I've addressed. The previous one was Wimbledon. So what I'll do is keep to the same lines so that there is a consistency throughout the discussion. So if you were at Wimbledon, you'll hear roughly the same areas that I'll be covering as a kind of a state of the borough interest to residents. What I wanted to start with was an anonymised, confidential, in terms of who it is, report of someone that we feel along the line of Merton have supported and continue to support, and that's translated hundreds and thousands of times more. So Mr. Peters was born in 1923. He's 96 years old. He lives in Merton, lives alone in his 2-bedroom maisonette. He's never married, has no children. He has a nephew who lives up in the Midlands. He's an independent man, able to warm up his meals. His next door neighbour is very supportive, and they look out for each other. Sadly, Mr. Peters recently had a fall at home. He was on the floor for a few hours. He was found by his neighbour who called for an ambulance. Mr. Peters has high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, and during his stay in hospital, he was also diagnosed with having Alzheimer's disease. Upon discharge from hospital, a team from Merton Council visited Mr. Peters to undertake a programme of re-ablement and an assessment of need. They asked what would Mr. Peters like to achieve, what things interested him, what hobbies and interests did he have, and how they could support him to regain his confidence and his skills. Mr. Peters said he felt low due to his Alzheimer's diagnosis. Together, Mr. Peters and the team from Merton Council devised a plan and set some goals to achieve. The re-ablement plan put in place by Merton Council would mean that Mr. Peters would receive 4 calls a day: morning for support with personal care, afternoon for support with preparing lunch, tea time again for support with domestic tasks, medication and light meal, and then in evening support with preparing for bed. Occupational therapists visited Mr. Peters. Equipment was installed at home to support him managing his own personal care. He received a raised toilet seat and a frame, a raised chair and bath board to support with using the bath to wash. Re-ablement support workers from the council supported and provided supervision with personal care, washing, dressing and undressing. The neighbours said that they would currently do the shopping for Mr. Peters. There was also a referral for a mascot alarm and a key safe is now in place. A mascot is a service provided by Merton Council not only to Merton residents but also a shared service with Lewisham residents that we undertake for Lewisham. And that's where people have a key fob, and if they fall, they press that and then support comes straight away. Mr. Bliss felt he felt socially isolated, so support workers made a referral to Age UK Merton for social support, ongoing shopping and cleaning services. A re-able would now visit 3 times a day instead of 4 times a day, and this will be reduced even more. Mr. Peters now says he's happy, he's regained his confidence and his independence, which is what he wanted. So that's our support to Mr. Peters. In terms of our controllable income, about £150 million, 45% of that goes on people like Mr. Peters, and rightly so. So our adult social care is one of the best in the country, top notch, and that is something that the London Borough Merton Council will continue to do for our residents who need adult social care services. And it's not just elderly people, but we also have services for children in our care, leavers and so on. And that's the tough nature of being of running a local authority. The budgets are tight, and all local authority budgets in London have been cut. Ours has been cut by up to 60% since 2010, but we need to still continue to look after people like Mr. Peters, and we will continue to do so. And that makes doing other things even more difficult, but we will continue to do so. Now, the Chair said that we're going to discuss climate change. I'm pleased that we've signed through all party support the climate emergency motion. and said we won't be mentioning Brexit, but I will mention Brexit, because again, I think it is important that a local authority like the London Borough of Merton comes to the aid of our 24,000 EU citizens who are worried about the implications, not just of Brexit without a deal, but Brexit even with a deal. As you all know, this local authority is a Remain local authority. The vast majority of residents, both in Wimbledon up to 73% and in Mitcham more than 63%, voted for Remain. And I, as the leader of the council, support Remain. And I think we should remain. But having said that, we have 24,000 EU citizens and we need to support them. So what has the London Borough of Merton done? Well, I've appointed and asked the Cabinet Amendment to be the lead for Brexit, implications of Brexit for the borough and for the borough's residents, all residents, but also for our residents who are EU citizens, and also set up a task group on Brexit led by Director Caroline Holland, Corporate Services, and the task group has met monthly since November 2018. We've updated our risk register. Every local authority has a risk register. We've updated it to take into account should there be Brexit without a deal or even Brexit with a deal. And we need to up our support for our EU citizens. So we raised the issue in our magazine by Merton. We set up the task group. We've got a cabinet lead. We've got directors looking into this. We've also funded a specialist officer at Citizens Advice Bureau, Merton and Lambeth, and there's an office by the council building. So that's we've allocated over £50,000 to a specialist experts on second status applications for our EU citizens. And we estimate that out of the 24,000, about just 10,000 applied for EU second status, and obviously there's a long way to go. We also have a service that we're proud of at Malden Register Office, which does a scanning of documentation. It's very important, the application to EU second status. We also allocated some monies to adult social care to look into the implications of Brexit for recruitment of social workers, because that is going to be tough. We are going to lose good people as a result of Brexit, and we're going to find it increasingly difficult to recruit workers in the social care industry as a result of Brexit. More reasons why we should remain in the EU, but the Council is prepared to support our residents. I think that's how it should be. And again, those policies like carbon emergency, climate emergency, have full support from certainly from the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, and the Independents. I'm not sure just yet about the position of the local Conservatives. It's also important that Council supports families, and I was interested to learn today that a website called My London has done a piece of research about where the most family-friendly borough lies, and the London Borough of Merton has come fourth out of 32 boroughs as being one of the most family-friendly boroughs. They base that on looking at schools, and we have outstanding schools in the London Borough of Merton, on house prices, house sizes, crime rates, green space, pollution levels, quietness of the area, and life satisfaction. So Sutton comes first, Richmond second, Kingston third, and then the London Borough of Merton fourth. And as you know, we are minded to be a family-friendly borough. We have the family-friendly leisure centre up in Malden Park that we're all very, very proud of, and that is very, very family-friendly indeed. I think it's also important as a borough, given that over 450 libraries have closed since 2010, that we retain all our libraries like this one, which is a brand new library, a dementia-friendly library, a library that was built with the support of the developer who had some flats upstairs, built a library for us, but we've kept all our libraries open, and they're hugely successful. Wimbledon, our biggest library, has an art space at the back, canteen facilities, So I'm very proud of our libraries, and I want to thank our volunteers, without whom all our libraries would not be able to remain open, and the volunteers play a key and critical role in our libraries. Libraries are important to school kids, and so that's taking on to our schools. A number of years ago, a lot of parents would go out of borough. It was not good for this borough that many parents thought the schools in this borough were not good enough. And so they went to Kingston, to Sutton, to Wandsworth. I can tell you that the level of out-of-borough school places is now drastically reduced. We invested monies into expanding 23 primary schools to create additional school places. Some very controversial ones, where the Nimbus came out in Dundon, for example, and so on. But we continued with that programme, and now we need to address secondary school places, and that is why we have a brand new secondary school place up and running in Cannon Hill, but due to move to its brand new place in South Wimbledon, just by the High Park. And that school is already oversubscribed, and very proud that we're able to address. And one of the nodal points for admissions to that Harris Academy in Wimbledon will be Colliers Wood. And so that is good for the area. 95% of our schools are good to outstanding. I'm talking about Ursuline. Rutledge was a sing school some years ago, a school you would not send your boy to. Now it's one of the most outstanding schools in London, according to Ofsted. Ursuline, another excellent school that wanted to go academy routes some years ago. We sat down with the head teacher there and persuaded her that, stay within the family of our Ilia style schools, our state schools. And she has. She's got brand new facilities, but also playing fields in terms of Morley Park, which is first and foremost her. She can lay claim to playing fields for her girls before the local residents can. And there was a huge fight, but some residents wanted to run the playing fields and allow the school now and again. We've done it the other way around. The playing fields go to the girls first and foremost, and then when the school isn't used it, the residents can then lay claim. And that's how we have our values in terms of supporting adult social care, supporting our lives, supporting families, supporting schools. Another thing we need to continue to support as a council, and we have huge support on this from both MPs, but in particular Siobhan McDonald, the Member of Parliament for Mitcham, and that is her undoubted support year in, year out, since 1996 for St Helier Hospital, with the support of the local authority. Everyone supports St Helier Hospital. And the government has recently announced that there is more money for the Southwest, more money, but is it for St Helier? Or is it to build a brand new school, a brand new hospital at Belmont, and denude St Helier of its A&E? So this council, along with support from Siobhan McDonald, will continue to fight to support St Helier Hospital. For any new hospital to be on the St Helier site, any brand new hospital on the St Helier site, not in Belmont. In that, we're supported by an organisation called COSH. We're all working together to make sure that any monies that Mr Daniel Elkins is given from the government for a new hospital is a brand new one at St Helier. And whatever happens, the services, the maternity and the A&E stays at St Helier. St Helier is where my children were born. Maria was 2 months premature and was £2.5. Andres was a whopping £4, 1 month premature. And the consultant knew exactly the time when to say, look, these children are suffering in your wife's room. We need to take them out. It will be intensive care. So both our children were born at St Helier Hospital. It had that intensive care unit. I support St Helier staying exactly where it is. And the full panoply of the local authorities might, whilst it needs to work with the CCG and with the local authority and with the bureaucrats at the National Health Service, we will find, because keeping all the services at St Helier helps St George's as well. Because if you close the ADS at St Helier, there'll be a huge push at St George's. So we need to do that, and we will continue to do that. And finally, for me, just on the voluntary sector, I alluded to volunteers in particular for libraries, but the council has allocated £1 million to the voluntary sector for community projects, and that comes from developers. So when developers get their planning permission at the Planning Applications Committee, we insist on monies that they pay. So, for example, AFC Wimbledon gladly coming back to the borough at Plough Lane. Again, some years ago, there was an all-party motion. All the parties signed up to this football club that had been kicked out of the borough up to Milton Keynes, franchised by the Blazers and the Football Association, coming back to the borough. Not saying where, but coming back to the borough. But then our plans for sporting intensification of the old golf track worked well with the developers, with the club, with the council, with many more others that fought to bring back the club back to Plough Lane, with a 10,000-seater stadium going up to 20,000, community facilities, and all kinds of other facilities, a 500-seater function hall facility that will be one of the biggest in the borough. But we have got money from the developers there who have been given planning permission for flats around the football stadium, and some of that money will go to Hayden Bruce and shopping parade to boost that up. But also, as you all know, we do what we can for Colliers Wood, shopping parade. We have the ugliest building in London, if not in the country, beamed live on television, and we just had to get that done. Sadly, there was no affordable housing, was the pain we had to pay just to get that done. One of the most difficult property owners, sadly, who dominates some of the land we have here in Merton. And so we will continue to do what we can to use monies gleaned from developers to get a better place in terms of Merton. Thank you very much. That is some of the things I wanted to say. Very happy to take questions either on everything I've said, anything I've said, or anything else.
Yes. It shows ahead of you.
I just want to clarify when you said 10,000 seater stadium going up to 20,000, what does that mean?
That means they start off at 10,000, but have the ability to build.
So if they want, they can
go up to 20,000. The planning permission is for 20,000.
And the loading points at High Path, when do those come into effect?
Well, so September 2020 is when
so that's when the
next edition
will start using the loading points. They're not used at the moment. Yeah.
No, because they went to Cannon Building. It's going to Cannon Building.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't know when the nodal points were started.
I don't know if the nodal points have been used for Cannon Hill or whether they're going to be used in April.
Kids flying from Mitcham all over, aren't they?
Oh, they can apply from anywhere, but one of the nodal points is Colliers, which is.
So do they get priority? Is that what?
Yeah, I think if they're within the nodal points, yeah.
About a year ago, I asked a question about deductions from the Veolia contract.
Yeah.
And back then you said you're going to hit them for the maximum permissible under the contract, which was 10%. We're now over 2.5 years into the contract. I understand that funds are being withheld, but there aren't actually any deductions that have gone into the council's purse.
Yeah.
So I guess I've got a couple, if you forgive me. So one question is, why after 2.5 years has Merton still not levied any contractual deductions from Veolia?
Yeah. That's because we're in dispute with Veolia. Yeah.
Yeah. But surely after a year and a half, whatever problems there are with regards to non-conformities from, say, a year ago, it should be cut and dry. Evidence, contractual deductions. I can't understand why at least since you began to enter into disputes, the council hasn't organised itself to find a way to levy deductions that cannot be disputed by Veolia.
Yeah, because they're disputed by the
But what I'm saying is, if you go back, if you realise that, for example, and I get it, because they're going to be lawyered up and they're going to want to dispute every penny, but if you have NCOs that go and they have timestamps, they have photographs, videos, etc., stuff that is watertight that Veolia cannot dispute,
Yeah.
there's no ground. I understand at the beginning of the contract with, you know, this bedding in period, etc. I understand why your guys might have been overrun by the Veolia experts in dodging the financial deduction bullet, right? But 2.5 years is no excuse for, right? Like after last year, going forward, there's no excuse for. So that really is a concern. Croydon deducted $1 million within a few months of their contract. And so I think there's a problem somewhere still with management of the council in at least not levying deductions in the governance. So again, you know, can we hope that we're not here in a year and there's still no deductions?
What are you doing to address the staff competency?
Yes, so I
Is this
agree
related?
we need to resolve this as quickly as possible. We did all we can to resolve it. It has taken longer than I would have expected, and we are nearly there. But once we get there, there will be those deductions as a result of their underperformance. So we haven't lost anything, we've lost time, and we may have lost monies in our coffers earlier than normal. But we have deducted from the contract, but that's money that was ours anyway, so we've not given them a percentage of the contract. But I agree with you, it would be great if we can get this done as quickly as possible. We're doing everything we can to resolve that, whilst trying to improve the performance as well.
Yeah. But I don't think we are. You know, a year has gone by, I don't think we are. Because, anecdotally, I had a reply to a stage 2 complaint. It incensed me. I take videos and photographs regularly now because I know the way that the complaints team and the waste management try and deflect. And they sent someone out at the end of my stage 2 complaint on a Friday and then 5:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. And in response to the stage 2, they said, of course there's no problems with contract management and inspections. Look how clean it is. Taking photographs after 2 people had attended the road in 1 week in response to my complaint. Now, that at best is disingenuous. The reality that we see is Park Road, Robertson Road today have 2 huge fly tips on them. We had a meeting with Siobhan across the road and were given lots of assurances that everything would change. So, you know, whilst I understand and I, you know, perhaps believe that you're trying, you know, the same management are in place. An AD was vacant for a year before they were enrolled. We've got NCOs that I'm being told can't cover all the complaints. So when you say you're trying your best, stuff's not happening. And a lot of it is down to basic governance and process, and it's not happening.
Well, we want it to happen. We're doing all we can to make it happen. I hear what you say. I'm sorry about the view you have over your complaint and how it was dealt with. In terms of there are aspects of it that are working that we need to be aware of. That is, the recycling is now 45% in the top 5 London boroughs for recycling, and the level of stuff that goes to landfill is virtually nil. So, and the satisfaction with the wheelie bin service is there. However, I appreciate and I acknowledge and I recognise that miscollections, fly tipping is something that we still need to address, and we are addressing it. It's taking longer than I would have liked, but we will get there. And I would want that within the next 6 months that we see a drastic improvement. Fly tipping, we need to acknowledge, is fly tipped by people, not by the London Borough of Merton.
I understand this, Stephen.
But we need to address it.
I understand. My recycling was not collected this week. last week 2 roads were not collected, full roads in recycling week, not collected by your contractors, which we told you are useless, and you still pay them every single month. You send the money off to Croydon. Well, you're not listening, or something's going wrong between the communication we have with you every meeting. This meeting here is yearly. We had the same discussion last year, and we'll have the same discussion next year.
So things aren't where we want them to be. I acknowledge that. We are doing our level best to improve it. There are huge swathes of the area which are clean, which are pristine, where it's working. It may not be working yet. Well, Cannon Hill, where I live, is pretty clean. However, it's not to take away from what you say. I do not want to take away from what you say. I acknowledge it. It is not where it needs to be. We have a job of work to do, and we will get there.
Stephen, so the executive has the... Sorry, go.
If we go to Cavendish Road right now, there's been a bag that is... In the meeting last month, 2 months ago, in the centre, I mentioned that there's a road that's kind of hidden and is fly tipping every week. So in the beginning of the week, there was a bin bag just left in the middle of the road. Yeah, I saw a street cleaner go by, nothing happened. The bin day came, nothing happened. Now the bag has been torn apart, there's clothes everywhere, all over the pavement, onto the road. Nothing's been done. It's right next, like 2 minute walk there. So how are you telling me that Veolia are still employed? If I've done that in the private sector, if my boss said, go do this, and I left it for a week, I'd be fired.
I think the whole problem starts because of privatisation, quite honestly. And I'm worried about the NHS, because of parts of that is secretly being hived off. And I'm just worrying in case, you said that there's going to be money put into the hospitals to make them nicer and everything. Will that make it nicer for the people that want to buy it? Boris is hand in glove with Trump, and Trump's got everything privatised out there as far as the health service goes. And I'm just wondering if that's what we've got to look forward to, if Boris takes control.
I agree with you. It should be privatised. It's the NHS.
So we privatise the rubbish and it's not working. And I was telling your colleague earlier, I have no other needs from the council. I don't have any children, I don't have elderly relatives. My basic need from the council that I expect every week is the rubbish. And it's not being met. And I'm still being asked to pay £80 every month. For what? Where is my money going? I've seen nothing. And I've lived here nearly a year now.
So your council tax is not hypothecated. It doesn't say this goes to there, that goes to here. It is a general tax on everyone. You will grow old one day. We will all grow old. And like Mr. Peters, you may need the service of a local authority.
But what about now?
But now I agree with you. I'm not disputing that the level of performance of the area is not where it needs to be. And it's not meeting your reasonable expectations. We are doing our level best to make sure that they are working to the level that you all expect.
Can we not cancel the contract? What are the... I don't understand why it's taking so long. I've been hearing complaints like that.
There's naivety when the contract was signed up to. Okay, the council has signed up to something that's going to cost them an absolute fortune to escape. Right, strategically, it was a bum move. I think the one promising thing out of the meeting that was in the community centre was your new cabinet member, who there was someone that I knew that was behind me, absolutely livid, was about to go nuclear, and at the end of his conversation, his talk, she said to me, I like him because he was honest and articulated the issues very succinctly, and he seemed to appreciate. But a lot of these problems are very basic to solve. Okay, the IT systems that the council has wasted millions on, the senior management that failed to get rid of the IT contractor after a number of years when they were still underperforming. These are basic things. And to this lady's point, anyone in the private sector would have been sacked. I watched on Merton.TV the committee meeting where part of that discussion was had about the IT system and the termination or the ending of the relationship with the contractor. There was no sense of urgency or disgust that the council management had allowed that to happen, right? It was very passive, just that whole conversation. So I think that things haven't changed. People are getting more upset. Respectfully, the conversation I heard on BBC Radio saying there isn't a waste problem inflamed a number of people, because it's not just, some people may have an axe to grind, etc., but many people genuinely don't, right? And so to hear there isn't a problem when we know that the fly tips are still there, and to the point I made last year again, and we're seeing it in Colliers Wood with a broken window syndrome, you know, you have a poor area, you attract a certain type of thing, and we're seeing burglaries and break-ins, you know, and whilst there may not be statistical causality, we can see a degradation of the area. Part of it is because of the state of the streets.
Yeah. Well, the council remains the fourth safest in London, so... But any...
Well, tell me some people that got burgled yesterday and last week.
I was burgled some time ago, and it's not good, but we're still one of the safest boroughs in London, yeah.
There was a bit of publicity a couple of weeks ago about investigating fly tipping. That's one of the things that I think council...
Enforcing,
and it's clear that a lot of the fly tipping, casual fly tipping of kind of household waste is because you've got a lot of HMOs that don't have enough bin space. They also don't have areas within houses that have been converted or flats been put in to store waste inside. So people are just putting them on the end of the road, like on Links Road where I live, by the post box, which has been closed off. The post box has been taken out of action because residents of the flat on the corner don't have anywhere to store stuff inside. So I think that's being investigated. John may be able to give an update on that.
Yes, sir.
But just the broader point is about the council seems to have taken a bit of a move on this investigation, this clarification of responsibility of the Veolia Council opening stuff, looking at that sort of stuff. That, I think, will help to stop a lot of the casual, when I say casual, I mean like not dump truckloads of builder space, that sort of stuff. I think that gives us a bit of reassurance, seeing that, and you know, you did publicise that on Twitter and Facebook and that sort of stuff. I think that gives us reassurance that something's being done and that people are being held to account for their kind of lazy, casual actions. And you know, that to me would reassure me. Seeing more of that, and you know, you publicising where you've taken action on particular people, focus people, and enforced them having bins, actually providing bins for residents, that sort of stuff. That sort of stuff on the fly tipping in particular would be kind of reassure us that things are being done.
Yeah, no, look, you're quite right there. I'm a firm believer in, if there has been enforcement, let's tell the residents about it. And the vast majority of residents are law-abiding, and they resent those who are not law-abiding, and they want the local authority to take action. So Toby Byers, who's a trainee barrister, who can handle a brief, attention to detail, I think will continue to develop that fly tip strategy and continue to get enforcement. And we are allocating more resources on the enforcement side. And that's one of the big issues that we've been grappling with, is that balance between looking after the vulnerable, the elderly, the children, and the street scene. Which is more important? They're both important. To you, the street scene is more important than Mr. Peters. I'm not saying you're wrong.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I might not get to the 80. I might get hit by a bus tomorrow.
So you may not be aware of Mr. Peters, but we as a council are aware of both your concerns, your concerns and Mr. Peters' concerns. So we have to have a...
So what Mr.
But this is not to take
the road. And it's full of Veolia green sacks or wheelie bins that Veolia have left all over the street, and maybe he's in a wheelchair and that wheelchair can't get through.
I agree with you. Combine the two issues. You combine the two issues nicely. Yeah. I didn't want to say one's more important than the other.
No.
What I'm saying is the council has to take a decision.
And Mr. Peters has been paying council tax for 40 years to get to that point.
Yes.
We're all paying the
I
same.
don't say it's either or, please. Don't. I just want to get a picture of what's happening.
Say something quickly about the fly tippers. Unless we can get evidence that the people who fly tip, the council can't do anything.
But that's fine, John. One of the problems, I've done this, and Tobin helped on one of them. He was excellent in taking ownership. But I've taken videos of fly tips with photographs, etc., of packaging and addresses, okay, and you report them, and they were never even inspected. Now, I get that if the council receives 100, they might not, but surely, again, through the IT system, through a very quick triage, the council can, you know, decide which ones they need to investigate. But the standard route, in the past at least, has been that you keep doing this and they're not even investigated.
No, they will.
I think it's changing.
When we report, so you know when we report online and it says, is there any identifying, does that mean that the report is treated differently? Because I think I have found in the past that if you say, yes, there's something in there, because you look at it, it's been bad, it's like household waste, and sure it's going to be letters, that sort of stuff. But actually I found that, or I believe that took longer then to be collected, and actually it'd be there 2 or 3 days later. So these days you probably just put no on it, because it means the owner will come by and actually pick it up. Yeah. And that might be my perception, or that might...
It gets flagged to the enforcement stage, which is in-house rather than the owner or external.
Is that helpful for you? Is that...
Yeah.
Well, it stays there a bit
Does
longer.
it actually then happen? Does it actually then...
Well, then it's the balance of the 3 people in the team,
yeah,
where they can get there and they can do it. So, yeah, I think I was thinking the other day was them doing the whole set in one stretch in one go. So they may do hotspot stuff like that, as well as routine stuff as they go. So, but yeah, it depends on what's coming in and what availability they've got.
What can I say about the fact if you follow up your complaint, find out why and when these people will be prosecuted, if you provide enough evidence? Follow it up. Why is that?
When we see a fly tip, or black sacks say, and often when I'm reporting fly tips now, to be honest, they're the only green sacks that have been there for a week. We are not going to open the black sacks to see if there's evidence.
No,
sure. Obviously,
but that's accurate.
So,
yeah.
So
but then do you contaminate it? Is it then not able to be looked at and to be treated as evidence? Because effectively, you know, we could have put the letters in there.
That's right. That's
yeah.
right. You are spot on. So Mark will be aware of the flight of Morton Green, the 3 tons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was tipped, and yeah, I wanted. You know, I saw a letter there, and I had to hand it immediately to an enforcement officer, and the enforcement officer said you should have allowed me to do that. But we've got the evidence now. That went to court, and there was a caution because don't. This is confidential, I know, but I'm not naming anyone anyway. There was a caution. There was a caution because the judge assessed that the person could take a full court trial. So that took 6 months. So, but yeah, the enforcement officer should be the privy because you could have put it there. You could have had a malicious intent or whatever. Okay.
This might sound a really silly question. Is fly tipping dealt with as part of the overall Viola contract, and therefore they're responsible for removing it and they have a certain agreement for it? Or does the council pay for it? For the removal?
So both have to deal with fly tipping. So the owner collect it.
Do they charge to collect it? Do they charge you to collect it?
Yeah, it's all in the contract. And then, but on enforcement, we have enforcement officers.
Yeah.
We're the prosecutors.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to, because for me, if it was part of their service level, if they have to pay for it to be picked up as part of the overall contract, and there's no additional cost to the council for doing it, there'll be some reason to incentivise them to help do something about it, and they just don't seem to be taking responsibility for it. Just an observation.
This is exactly the problem. In the past, the council road sweepers were incentivised to collect fly tipping and to not just do their contracted piece, which is what ultimately the early street sweepers do now. Is there a lever to pull to make those street sweepers responsible, or at least able to notify of fly tipping and help in the same way as they used to, and kind of
they should be collecting what they see. However, It's what's reported, I understand. And there is a suggestion that why don't they just keep driving around and collecting it all, but they do pick up what's reported.
Well, linking the climate issue, and I mentioned this to them, it's a known issue. Veolia will literally drive past a fly tip that is 2 metres next to the ones reported.
Yeah.
They'll pick up the reported one and leave the other one. I've seen a wooden bed dumped by a tree. They picked up 2 black sacks. They drove past the wood that you could not have missed. It was a bed frame that was dismantled and broken.
There's a lot of instances where the truck.
Yeah, I get this, but
Well, no, I don't think it's for. It's for a certain purpose of flighting. Or mattresses, they will drive past and phone another truck to collect mattresses, and it looks as though it's gone past. The other thing that residents are saying to me is, why do we separate when I just see the guys, the girls just plonk it into the same? They're not. There's compartments, and they're not only compartments within the big trucks. Either food waste goes in a certain compartment, and the other stuff goes in another compartment, whether it's cardboard or whatever. In the cages, there's also sort of you can't quite see a division of a wire netting, and they put one in there and one over there. I don't know, but residents think, why are they putting it in the same truck? But the contract has been in the making since 2006. It's called the South London Waste Partnership. 4 boroughs getting together to appoint one organisation to do the collection for all 4 boroughs. It's a huge contract.
So we can't get out of it.
It's a 25-year contract, but there is a clause.
An 8-year break.
There's an 8-year break that we will look at very closely, and we don't wait till the 8 years. With 2 years to go, we'll start looking at it. It is tough, but we are determined to make the contract work.
Is it possible in the 8 year, when the 8 years is up, to actually terminate the contract at that point?
Yeah. You use your right option after it.
Are our terms and contract and payments the same as the other 3 local authorities on the contract? Is it the same contract?
There are differences, because obviously we would have had a discussion. And in the tendering process, that we normally have 30,000 flights a year, so they would drop that down. Then Croydon might be more. I think my personal opinion is that they underbid. They were very, very keen to get a contract. It's what's called a deluxe contract.
But why didn't the council recognise that?
We did recognise.
You recognise that they underbid?
No, not at the time. Not at the time. No, we wanted the best. We wanted the best deal and the biggest savings.
Why did the council, the expertise of the council, not recognise that Veolia were underbidding? It's
No one. At that time,
they should have done. And I think perhaps this is where there's not enough experience in sorting out this kind of contract, because to go for a low tender is clearly going to be a mistake.
No, I don't think there's been any mistakes. What there has been is a lack of performance.
The problem is we're looking at the procurement department.
The pressures on
How
local
much
authorities.
extra has it cost the council, maybe employing extra staff, even if it was temporarily for a few months, because you only have 3 officers and there were some extras, 1 extra for a while? How much extra does it cost the council?
Wednesday and Thursdays, I think we're paying Veolia extra money as well each week.
Sorry?
Wednesdays and Thursdays, we're paying Veolia every week.
So how much extra?
So I don't know
Side
the
rubbish.
quantum sum, but we would seek to reclaim that in this dispute we have. But there is ongoing discussion.
And is there any intention to actually employ more enforcement officers who can actually go out and check these fly tips so that you can do more prosecution?
So, provided that we are better funded by the national government, yes, of course we would love to do that.
But I think there's a
So
model.
you in terms of lobbying your MP.
So not right. So
We want to employ more enforcement.
Yeah, no. So one of the problems is there aren't enough enforcement officers, because obviously the fly tipping has increased, and we know it's increased nationally. It's not just the Merton issue, but it is a huge issue for whatever reason.
It's a 40% increase in flights
I
in
don't
the
know
country.
why it's increased, but it has increased.
Yeah.
Presumably because people get charged for actually going and disposing of the waste. Presumably because builders and all sorts of people now get charged for disposing.
There's no excuse for.
And No, but you know, people want to get out of paying money, so
Yeah,
you know.
that's. Yeah.
So what you're saying is you are not going to employ any more people to do enforcement or whatever to try and sort out the problem because you don't have the money. Is that correct?
We want to employ more people in social care, we want to employ more people in enforcement, we want to employ more people.
If you
Wait, let me
employ
finish.
more people
Let
in
me finish.
enforcement, then maybe you will get more money for
If you let
fines.
me ask the question, then
Yeah.
go ahead.
Let me finish. We want to employ more people in planning. I know you're vexed about planning. That needs more resources because we're a very popular borough for developers. So yes, we want to employ more people. We've had a swathe of cuts through our local authority, like other local authorities, and we're all suffering for it. And if local authorities were better funded, we would be able to employ them.
But that's not actually my question, and that's not the answer to my question. So one was about enforcement officers. You had a contract that's now due for renewal, which was the one with, is it Kingdom or whatever? Who find people, because the contract was for littering and littering in something else, so they stand at the station and find people for dropping a cigarette end or dropping a piece of
Is that
paper.
wrong?
No, that's not wrong, but it means that they're not being employed to investigate fly tips and and stop people doing other things. And the anti-idling.
Yeah.
So, again, I'm thinking, was that contract ill thought out? Or should there have been another contract as well that dealt with these other issues? So I'm just a bit confused.
Yeah. Well,
Some of the things the council has done, and maybe there have been very good reasons at the time, but because I don't know how long the Kingdom contract is, but when you've got a 24-year contract, obviously things are going to change in that
Yeah, I
time.
don't think
Kingdom one's going out again imminently, I think. So,
Yeah.
It's up for renewal,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
and it's being looked at.
they're putting
So
out
it's
the
being
landing
looked
in.
at
Yeah.
to change it. To
Yeah.
more
So why not
appropriate
outsource
Bring that in.
enforcement of the Veolia contract? I'm sure there are enough complaints where the rectification notices and the damage demands. Let's say each one, I remember from say 10 years ago they were 10 quid a hit, and if you've got a few hundred complaints or 1,000 a week, even 10% of those will pay for a person or two people. It should fund itself, at least in the short term, until a contractor realises that when they default, they will have funds deducted.
It's a good idea.
Yes,
With the Trust Commission, two questions, if I may. One which I'll come to in a minute on planning, very short. The other is about Mr. Peters, and you say that he has a relative in the Midlands, and these are not theoretical questions, but I'm going to assume that that maisonette is a housing association property, which may or may not be due for demolition under a regeneration project. But the thing is, Mr. Peters actually wants to move to the Midlands to be with his close to his family relative. How does he, if he is in such a housing association property, and particularly if it is due for demolition by regeneration, is he not locked in that property because no one is prepared to do a house swap who happens to be in a local authority area, say the Midlands, or it might be in the north of England, it might be in Lancashire, wherever these somebody in Mr. Peters' situation may well be, that they cannot arrange to swap, so therefore they are trapped in Mitcham, perhaps, maybe on High Path, maybe in Wimbledon when the regeneration projects perhaps get that far around. What specific help and assistance could Merton Council offer to someone in that situation to break that logjam?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I don't know whether the house is his or a housing association. Two, I don't know whether he wants to move up to the Midlands. I don't know if his son wants him up there. But certainly, if there is a willingness or a discussion that needs to be had, and Mr. Peters and his son turn up at the council. Mr. Peters and who was up in
Close
relative. Sorry. If they turned up on our door, yes, we would have that conversation about swapping.
So this is something which
Merton
Council
has to
do.
stem from them. We can't nudge that.
So even though the housing association, be it Wanlaw, be it Hanover, be it Clarion or Moat, you would be able to facilitate, potentially
Well,
facilitate
if it was Clarion or whoever with a nominating authority, so we would want to know, get involved in whether a place is going to be vacated so we can nominate someone else in there. We would then have a discussion with the other local authority, but between them, if there's two housing associations, they would sign off the, but we would facilitate it.
Thank you for that. That really makes me. The other thing about planning is, let's assume that the current Conservative administration in the Department for Local Government, or whatever it's called this week, proceeds with this idea of, and I presume there are a number of little ifs, buts and maybes if it's in conservation areas, but basically any landowner who has a residential property can build not one storey on it, but a second storey of height for residential purposes without requiring planning permission. Obviously they have to go with the current building regulations, such as they may be. But if that is the case, if let's say tomorrow planning permission for a 4-storey new build residential block went in and was approved, could that developer then put another further 2 storeys on that without coming back to you for planning permission? So you actually end up with a 6-storey that you didn't want. With that in mind, would you be minded actually to restrict an application for a 4-storey to a 2-storey, somewhat preempting perhaps some of the unwanted side effects of a Conservative and maybe even a Labour policy?
I don't know what you're driving at, that's one thing. 2, planning is severely regulated by the national government. It's passed on to local authorities. But I wouldn't assume that you could have 4 and then 2 under permitted development. I can't.
Why not?
Yeah. I get what you mean. I get your drift.
Yeah.
I get your drift. But we predicted as the opposition, not in the council but in the country, that permitted development rights would end in tears. But not only that, turning shops into flats, turning warehouses into flats, it's all not good. And it all goes back to Lord Pickles. And it's still in place.
As I read that proposal, I thought the principle was it was extending houses rather than blocks. So I don't think you can extend something as big as a 4-storey.
It was talking about that a single-storey extension would be treated the same as a 2-storey extension would be the same as a loft conversion.
Yeah.
So it talks mostly about expanding space into existing homes.
Yeah.
But I see your kind of slippery slope.
Yes. It certainly does depend, on a number of factors, and it may well be that the proposal for most people isn't actually cost effective.
I'll raise that with the senior plan. I'm curious now as a result of your query.
Yeah, I raise it specifically looking at some of the plans for the Abbey Wall site in Station Road, for example, whereby even 4 storeys arguably is going to create a number of overshadowing over existing 2-storey residential dwellings. If that was to go up further under any permitted development, it could cause a problem.
Linking to planning actually, and an email I think Eve originally triggered to do with the withdrawal of the objections from the online portal. I followed up with, I don't know if you saw, with an FOI request, and your planner sent a decent response back, and it seemed that there were some redactions to objections that weren't carried out. Someone wrote in and said, you're in trouble, potential risk under GDPR. And then the risk register had, we have a risk of poor redaction. And then the nuclear button seems to have been hit, and they've gone, well, let's not do anything then, rather than let's train or something like that. Because I think realistically, looking at being able to browse, is one of these elements of transparency. It's not just if your neighbour is doing something that you want to look at the planning register. But I wonder if a halfway position could be met. And I get that it takes time to redact, and if you don't have to redact, you're saving officer time, and I'm all in favour of that. But even something like listing whether or not there are any objections on a planning application, or the number of objections, and that way someone, with minimum effort, Eve could write in and say, hey, this one here, I see there are 2, can I have copies of them or can I inspect, rather than just a blanket, just applications and nothing behind it.
Yeah, no, I'll take that back. I'm aware of the issue. I'll take that back to officers. I know we receive thousands of these letters of objection, and we do our level best, and the officers there redacting, that is their job.
It takes time and mistakes will be made.
You're right, it is down to GDPR. We're not on our own, but I've asked officers to have another look at that. It does seem harsh, but I understand where they're coming from. But it does seem that we're not going to publish any objections at all. But you'll be surprised at the number of people who write in a strong letter of objection, and another person writes in another letter of objection to the objection of that person, and actually calls that other person names or alleges that they're in cahoots with, and then all of a sudden someone is told, did you know that Mrs. B, 3 blocks down the road, has objected to your letter of objection, and she said that you are and that element wasn't redacted. Then the council is in the fight. So we're not on our own, but councils have addressed this issue, and GDPR has been addressed, so we are looking at that.
I
so
totally
we took
get
an instant decision to vouchsafe the local authority from GDPR questions, but we are looking at that.
Yeah, I totally get it's not just redacting a signature and
Yeah.
maybe an address, and it's more complex. I don't want the council to embark on exercises that cost money that have little value. But I say maybe just merely highlighting on the planning and like the standard form, are there objections or something?
This came up at the Race Park Community Forum as well, and Neil Milligan was the planning.
He's the one that wrote back.
Yeah. So he was asked the same question, and his response that they are looking at new solutions and different alternatives, including new IT, that will help solve that issue. So they are on it, looking into it. So that the current situation is very much a short-term fix
to remove. Yeah.
And then
suggestion to what you just said, that someone writes in calling someone names. That if someone writes in a letter like that, it's not considered. That should be made quite clear. If someone's going to be using or accusing people of something in that sort of manner, then it should be quite clear that that representation won't be acceptable, because that is not acceptable. And 2, if there was some sort of pro forma, when you email in, this is where you must put this information so that it can be redacted. If you put it anywhere else, it may not get redacted, and you are agreeing to your information going online. So if it's stated, you must put your name and address at the top. You must not refer to anyone else's name and address.
Yeah.
And then it will make
maybe this new program do all that. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, yes, sir.
So if you have your house wanting to extend it, would you want to see your neighbours' comments made personally?
My neighbour's my mother-in-law.
Yes. You would want to see her comments. So naturally, you paying £50,000 or whatever you want to invest in this extension, you want to see the comments. So one person at least is wanting to look at the comments, which will be redacted, which means everyone can see this redacted information, because it's going to be redacted for the person that is paying the council. There's a fee to have planning, so the fee is already in the charge. If it costs £10 to redact all the paperwork, you add that to the cost of the planning application.
As I said, we've taken a decision. It's a crystal clear decision, but we are going back on it to see whether we can have that balance between satisfying GDPR but also allowing the residents to look at objections.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. Yeah, we have the last item in open forum, but I think this was the open forum. But then if you have any other questions, then you can ask it.
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question?
I don't know if anyone knows. There was a rape in Wandle Park in the summer. Has there been any update on that? Have they found the perpetrator, or has there been any progress? I was hoping the police might be giving.
I can answer that. He's in custody at the moment.
Sorry?
Someone is in custody.
Someone's in custody. Thank you. And I have another question. Was before they renovated the front and put the new wall and the gates, was it lockable in the past?
Yeah.
Or was it always been
What
open
this
like
this
that?
park?
Yeah. Has it always
Wandle Park.
Yeah.
It used to be locked, but there's always been one gate left open in the 35 years that I've.
But the fact that
It
it
always
was
used to be
lockable
locked,
would have
yeah.
discouraged people from walking through in the dark.
Yeah.
Or being able to drag someone in. I don't know how
Yeah.
the incident happened, whether someone was dragged in or that they were walking through.
Yeah,
Any
it
other
used to be
questions?
locked.
I sort of feel it's a
Yeah,
detrimental
it's
step to leave it so open to that.
Yeah, just a question on the London Road roundabout works, and I guess linked onto the Bishopswood Road Bridge, whether there's any update on the progress of that, on when there's going to be any sort of information on resolution, progress of the London Road roundabout works, which is causing massive issues for the people of Graveney and of Mitcham and more broadly.
Yeah, on the London Road roundabout and on the bridge. So we have a number of bridges that within the borough that are our assets, and we're very, very sorry about what happened at Bishopswood Bridge. So officers are working very, very hard to come to a report that lands before me to take a decision as to whether to repair or completely renew.
Is there a due date for that?
I'm pushing for that report as quickly as possible, hopefully before the end of November, certainly before the end of the year, but a due process has to take place. And I will not, once that report is in front of me, we will not prevaricate, we'll take that decision based on.
Does that report include costs and plans
It'll have costs,
for the options?
yes, for the two options. One is repair, and it could say repair 2 million will last for another 30 years, replenish 20 million, it'll last for 100 years. And we'll see, what decision we need to take. Yeah, I know. We'll see what the value.
What's the process then for decision making on that? Is that done through cabinet? Is that through council? Is that then do you talk to the TfL? Is there a broader discussion about that?
It is our bridge. Obviously, we need to negotiate and inform TfL, but I think it's at cabinet level. There's a lot of money there. We're what's called self-insure, so there is contingency and reserves to dip into for those kinds of rainy days, as we say. On London Road, we'll try and do it as quickly as possible with the powers.
If anyone's really keen on coming to more community forum, I'd love to start coming to them. The Bishop Bridge will be on the agenda for the Morton Forum on the 16th, so there'll be officers. Morton. Yeah, don't confuse me.
Which one are you at?
I'm going to Mitcham as well, but Bishop Road will be on the Morton one on the 16th. Someone coming from University to give an update on where they're at.
And then on the London Road roundabout, I think it's just quite a surprise that happened. There was no consultation. We didn't really see it coming, and then it's happening at the same time as the disruption on the bridge, and it all kind of
comes together.
Yeah, it's long been scheduled for August because it's the quietest time, the best time to do those kind of works. There's generally less traffic because of the lack of school run and people on holiday.
But it's been started in August. It's not due to finish until December.
Yeah, so that was the schedule, and I think they were called that one, then clashing with Bishop, which obviously was not planned.
Yes, please.
Sorry. Two other questions on planning, but they're very related. I went to the Reserve Matters in respect of Phase 2 of High Path Planning Applications Committee, and I arranged, I think one of the councillors, for asking the two questions, but I was surprised that the council officer didn't have the answers in front of him, given that one would have thought that if an applicant puts in a area map of where he's going to do the work, and he has a number of schedules to that, the answer should be relatively straightforward to find. One question was the applicant was going to plant a total of 27 trees. We would leave aside the 5 they're going to take away, so it's actually a net increase of 22. And I wanted to know where exactly within that area those 27 trees would be, because the reason for that being I couldn't see where they would fit. Could be me being stupid, but there was a number of mumblings, somewhat in Boris Johnson style, from the planning officer, and we didn't get a clear answer on the day. The second question was how many 2-bedroom, 5-person flats were going to be built by the end of phase 2, including phase 1 phase 1 and 1A, and again, there was not a clear answer on that. I went back to the documents myself for phase 2, and the answer is 0. I forgot to go back and look at 1 and 1A, but I was surprised that that kind of information is not readily accessible from the applicant or from the planning officer, and they are relatively straightforward questions.
Well, at the planning committee, the planning office do not refer to the applicant. The process is that people who are not on the planning committee or are not the planning officer are not allowed to speak apart from their 2 or 3 minutes that they have provided.
Yes, but the committee is allowed to ask questions, which
of
they were.
The planning officer. The planning officer doesn't normally then refer back to the applicant.
So, so my point is the planning officer does not appear to have full control of the brief in order to be able to potentially satisfactorily answer the question raised of him.
That happens quite a lot.
Yeah, so the planning application committee process is very heavily prescribed, as Edith said, in terms of you can't come back and officers can't come back to you. There's no questions to councillors who are on the committee, but yes, I would expect officers to have the answers. Sometimes they may have just moved on rather than answer. They may have had the answer there but just moved on. I wasn't there. I'm not aware. What I can commit is that we, as a borough, have a very professional cadre of staff, despite the fact that there are huge difficulties in recruiting planners in the public sector because of the cuts and the severe restraints and pay rises for the public sector, and we're losing them to the private sector. But we, as a borough, have a very efficient and very transparent and democratic planning applications system. However, I can see from your viewpoint, it can be frustrating when you're sat there and things seem to move on without some questions being answered. But the fundamentals, the material, all that material stuff is that there are 3 regeneration of 3 estates where there's overcrowding, bad housing, 3 blocks that have been chopped away, and it has been lauded by Dave Hill, the London commentator, formerly in The Guardian, as one of the best 3 regenerations in London.
Yeah, only because we weren't good enough to rebut what Dave Hill said.
You need bigger pictures sometimes, so you get things done, you're business-like, you make things happen.
I want to go back to the Wonder Park here. That was the edge along the pavement on Colliers High Street was done up in the last year. I can't remember when now. Was that the council who makes that decision and funds it? Is it the National Trust who does it? Who designed it? Why is it so open? Because I do not walk along that side of the road in the evening. I will walk along this side of the road, along the wind tunnel provided by the Tanking Point, as it's now called, which is not pleasant in itself, and all the busy road junctions I have to cross. So who designed it and made the decision to design it that way? Who funded it? And did they not think about safety when they were doing it at night for women especially, or marvelous horse people?
I haven't got those answers. It does seem pretty open. There would be a brief that may have been about being open and being attractive to go into. I'm not sure, but if since that was the case, there have been issues with crimes within the park that we need to address question of whether we need to be a bit more enclosed. There's a balance to be struck, but it's awful that that incident occurred. And if you open the civic lecturing, hopefully the police will may inform us more of this culprit who's under custody. We may have to revisit that openness.
I can answer some of those questions. Sorry, just you can't know everything. But, it was Future Merton, and there was a mass of public meetings about them where the public, well-attended public meetings where people were asked on their comments. I get your point, but there were many, many hundreds of people in Colliers.
And were the comments listened to?
Yeah, they were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so, is there no more questions? Thanks for coming to Area Forum. Hope to see you again at the next meeting. So we close the meeting now. Have a safe travel.